the madness of Hera, long before his name echoed across temples and mountain tops, before songs immortalized his feats. Hercules was not yet a hero. He was a child born of lightning and betrayal, a consequence of the gods' whims and the mortal world caught in their wake. He was born Alcaeus, though the world would later call him Hercules, meaning glory of Hera, a name that would sting with irony for eternity. He was the son of Zeus, king of the gods, and Alcmene, a mortal woman of Thebes, descended from Perseus himself. Zeus, as was his custom, descended in disguise, cloaking himself in the form of Alcmene's husband, Amphitryon, and thus conceived a child destined for greatness. But greatness in Olympus was a curse as much as a gift, and Hera, wife of Zeus, queen of heaven, would not allow the fruit of her husband's betrayal to grow without suffering. From the moment Hercules cried his first breath, Hera knew. She heard the echoes of prophecy whispering through the halls of Olympus. They said the child would rise above all men, that he would become a god in flesh, feared by monsters and worshipped by kings, that his name would one day challenge the very seat of power. Hera's heart hardened like the stone beneath Olympus. Her rage, slow-burning and ancient, coiled around her like a serpent. She would not strike openly. She would be patient, silent, until the moment came. In his infancy, Hera sent 2 serpents to slither into the child's cradle under the cloak of night. Their scales glistened with poison. Their fangs longed for divine blood. But when they reached him, they found not a sleeping babe, but a force they could not understand. Hercules rose, small hands wrapped around serpent necks. With a cry that shook the walls of the house, he crushed them. From that day, all of Thebes knew he was no ordinary child. But Hera did not stop. She waited, and when Hercules grew into a man, when his strength became legend, and his heart still mortal, she struck again not with snakes, but with madness. Hercules had married Megara, a kind and noble woman, daughter of the king of Thebes. She bore him sons. For a time, he knew peace or what resembled it. He built a home. He laughed. He set aside the sword. But Hera had not forgotten. One twilight, as the hearth crackled and his sons played at his feet, she whispered, not into his ear, but into his soul. A veil fell across his vision. His heart beat faster, not with joy, but with something darker. His mind clouded. The world twisted. He no longer saw his sons. He saw enemies. He saw monsters. He rose in fury, in confusion, in horror. And by the time the mist lifted from his eyes, Megara lay silent. So did the children. And Hercules, drenched in the blood of those he loved, let out a roar that shattered the stars. The people of Thebes feared him. Whispers grew like weeds. The hero had become cursed. The son of Zeus, now a creature of death, he fled to the mountains, a shadow of himself, no longer the demigod who had wrestled lions or lifted cities, but a broken man with hands he could not cleanse. He wandered, seeking silence, seeking punishment, until one night, beneath a sky blacker than sorrow, he heard a voice. It came from within, yet beyond. Go to Delphi, ask the god. He traveled to the temple of Apollo at Delphi, where the Pythia, the oracle, awaited. She sat upon a tripod, wreathed in mist, her eyes glazed with the weight of the divine. When Hercules entered, the air changed. The torches flickered. Even Apollo himself seemed to listen. The Pythia spoke. 12 years of servitude shall cleanse the blood upon your hands. Go to Tyrans. Serve King Eurystheus. Complete the labors he commands. Only then shall the scales be balanced. Hercules bowed his head, and if I refuse, the oracle did not blink. Then you shall remain cursed. No man, no god, no peace. He left Delphi with no weapons, no pride, only a burden. To the halls of Tyrans he went, where his cousin Eurystheus, pale and envious, ruled. Eurystheus had always feared Hercules, his strength, his name. Now, with the god's command in hand, he saw an opportunity not to test his cousin, but to destroy him. He devised 12 tasks, 12 labors, each one crueler than the last, each one designed not to be survived, but Hercules accepted them, not as challenges, but as penance. For he had tasted madness. He had felt the blood of his sons upon his skin, and now, only by walking through the fire of the impossible, could he hope to be clean. Thus began the story not of a warrior, but of a man shattered by the gods and remade through suffering, a man who would face monsters, beasts, betrayal, and death itself, not for glory, but for forgiveness. This was the beginning of the 12 labors of Hercules, the lion of Nemea, and the hydra of Lerna. The path of redemption begins not with words, but with wounds. Hercules, now bound to the will of King Eurystheus, walked alone into the wilds of Greece, where monsters stirred and the scent of old blood lingered in the wind. His first labor was whispered by trembling courtiers and scoffed at by oracles who had once praised him, to slay the Nemean lion. This was no ordinary beast, born of Echidna, the mother of monsters, and raised in the dark places of the earth. The lion was a creature of divine rage. Its golden fur was impervious to spear or sword. Its breath fouled the air. Its roar cracked trees. It prowled the hills of Nemea, devouring warriors and vanishing into cave shadow, leaving only silence and bones. Hercules made no boast, carried no armor. He took with him only a club carved from an olive tree, and a cloak wrapped around his shoulders, the garments of a man, not a legend. For days he tracked the beast, following broken branches and claw marks carved into stone. At last, he found the lion in the mouth of a cave, its yellow eyes gleaming like suns in the dark. The lion charged. Hercules stood his ground. His arrows shattered on its hide. His blade snapped at its neck. The beast lunged. Jaws wide enough to crush a boar, and Hercules met it with a roar of his own. He dropped his weapons and leapt, seizing the lion by the throat. They struggled in the dust and blood. The ground shook, bones split, but Hercules did not let go. His arms, wrought with the strength of a god, closed tighter, tighter until the lion's breath stilled. And then, silence. When he returned, he wore the lion's skin as a cloak, its gaping jaws draped over his head like a crown. Even Eurystheus, from behind the safety of palace walls, shivered at the sight. The first labor was done, but the second awaited. Far to the south, in the swamp of Lerna, a new horror stirred. The Hydra, a serpent of 9 heads, each fanged with venom, each sprouting anew when severed. Its breath withered crops. Its blood could kill with a touch. The marshland around it reeked of decay, a wasteland choked with fog and the bones of the curious. Hercules, undeterred, journeyed there alone. But he did not remain alone. At the edge of the mire, his nephew Iolaus joined him young, eager and untested. Hercules warned him. This was not a place for glory. It was a place for necessity. Still, Iolaus stayed. The Hydra rose from the murk like a nightmare given flesh. Its 9 heads hissed in unison. When Hercules cut one, 2 more sprang forth. He fought like a tempest, striking, dodging, roaring back at the beast's shrieks. But for every victory, more heads bloomed like cursed fruit. And then Iolaus, quick of thought, brought fire. As Hercules severed each head, Iolaus pressed a burning brand to the neck, cauterizing the wound, denying regeneration. One by one, the heads fell and did not return. The final head, immortal and thrashing, was trapped beneath a rock, its fangs still dripping poison even as its body died. From its blood, Hercules collected venom, knowing its potency would serve him in battles yet to come. 2 labors now complete, 2 monsters slain, but the road ahead was long, and Eurystheus smiled from his throne, for he had many more horrors to send Hercules into, not because he feared the monsters, but because he feared what a man like Hercules might become if he ever truly forgave himself. The golden hind and the boar of Erymanthos. The summer air over Tiryns hung heavy and breathless, as though Olympus itself waited to see whether the son of Zeus would falter. Eurystheus, petty, insecure, draped in soft silks, and pride watched from his throne, unimpressed that Hercules had triumphed over beasts and curses, over blood and poison, over the trials that would have broken mortal men. But he was not finished, and neither were the gods. The next challenge was whispered by Hera into Eurystheus's dreaming ear, not one of violence, but of cunning, not one of death, but of sacred restraint. He summoned Hercules and, without rising, gave him the third labor. "Bring me the golden hind of Artemis," he said with a smug smile, as though naming something impossible would be enough to preserve his throne. The golden hind, also known as the Carynean hind, was no mere animal. It was a divine creature. Sacred to the virgin huntress Artemis, its hooves were said to be swifter than arrows. Its hide gleamed like molten sunlight, and its antlers, though delicate, were harder than bronze. To harm the hind was to offend a goddess whose wrath could wither forests. It was a trap, but not one of stone or sword, one of piety. Hercules bowed without a word and left the hall, his lion's skin trailing behind him, his club resting heavy on his back. There was no map, no weapon that would help him, only the sound of whispers from those who knew he would fail not by weakness, but by blasphemy. He began his hunt at dawn. The Carynean hind roamed the Arcadian wilderness, between rivers untouched by man and forests untouched by fire. It had lived for centuries, maybe more. Hunters told stories of catching a glimpse of its golden glow beneath the trees before it vanished like morning mist. Hercules tracked it by signs others would have overlooked, a bend in the tall grass, dew disturbed in a perfect arc, tiny cracks in the bark of trees as though kissed by lightning. The hind was cautious, brilliant, fast, but it left a trail, and he was patient. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. He did not sleep deeply. He did not eat much. He did not speak. He followed, always just behind. Sometimes he would see it across a river, or at the far edge of a glade, and each time, when he stepped forward, it was gone. It was not a chase of strength. It was a conversation of will, and slowly, the hind began to notice him not as predator, but as shadow, not as threat, but as presence. On the 7th month of pursuit, as dawn bled into the branches of an old silverwood forest, Hercules found the hind grazing in a clearing bathed in fog. He did not reach for it. He did not draw his bow. He knelt, and for the first time, the hind did not flee. He moved with reverence, hands open, breath slow. When the hind finally allowed him to touch its golden fur, it was not to surrender. It was understanding. He whispered apologies to Artemis with every step he took, binding its hooves gently with vine cords, soft as wind. He knew she watched. He knew she judged. But he did not steal. He borrowed. And that was the only reason he made it back to Tiryns with the creature still alive. When he presented the hind to Eurystheus, the coward king cowered behind his guards, as if expecting divine wrath to strike. Hercules said nothing. He untied the creature, stroked its flank once, and let it run. It vanished in a golden blur. The silence in the hall was deeper than fear, and so passed the third labor not with blood, but with respect. But there was no time to rest. Hera would not allow it. Eurystheus soon called upon him again, more desperate now to see him fall. This time, the trial would be of strength and winter, of madness and brute force. "Bring me," he said, "the Erymanthian boar, The beast lived upon the slopes of Mount Erymanthos, where snows fell year-round and thunder cracked the sky. It was no ordinary boar larger than a bull, with tusks that split trees and rage that knew no leash. Villagers along the mountain's edge spoke of it in hushed curses, of crushed homes, of shattered fields, of blood in the snow. Hercules did not ask questions. He left before the sun had set. The climb was brutal. Snow whipped his face. Ice bit through his skin. The path to the summit was more jagged than any road he had walked before, not because of the stones, but because of the silence. No birds, no animals, only the sound of his breath, and the wind screaming like a god denied. He reached a hunting lodge, half-collapsed and abandoned, on the mountain's shoulder. There, he was greeted by an old friend, Pholus, a centaur known for his gentleness and wisdom. They shared a fire, a meal, and stories of old times. For a moment, Hercules was no longer a weapon of Olympus. He was a man, but fate would not leave him untouched. Pholus offered wine from a sacred jar meant for all centaurs. When Hercules uncorked it, the scent drifted through the mountain air, reaching the nostrils of other centaurs nearby. Driven mad by the divine scent and thinking their kin was under attack, they stormed the lodge. Chaos erupted. Hercules tried to defend himself without killing, but blood was spilled. Among the dead were friends and strangers, caught in misunderstanding, born of divine interference. Pholus himself died not by rage, but by accident. A poisoned arrow meant for defense slipped from Hercules' hand and struck his old friend. The sorrow was nearly unbearable, but still he climbed. At the summit, he found the boar. It roared like thunder, its breath steaming in the cold air. Its eyes were red. Its hooves pounded the frozen ground like war drums. Snow fell in sheets, obscuring the world. Hercules stood his ground. He waited, and as the beast charged, he leapt. The battle was furious, the ground torn asunder. The trees shattered, but Hercules did not kill. He wrestled, he bound, he roared louder than the monster, and in the end, he dragged the creature down the mountain in chains of ice and iron, all the way to Tiryns. When Eurystheus saw the boar, alive thrashing in fury, he screamed in terror and leapt into a bronze pot to hide. Hercules said nothing. He turned and walked away. 2 labors more were complete, not by war, not by victory, but by perseverance and pain and reverence. But Hera was watching still, and the road ahead would only grow darker. The Augean stables and the Stymphalian birds. The winter had not yet broken when Eurystheus summoned Hercules again. The king's voice was tight with disbelief. Each success of the demigod burned in his chest like poison. No monster had stopped him. No divine trick had broken his resolve. And still, Hercules stood taller than men, harder than fate. This time, there would be no glory, no beast to slay, no epic tale to echo through time. Eurystheus's voice, smooth and thin as snakeskin, echoed through the marble hall. Go to Elis, find King Augeas, clean his stables. In one day, Hercules raised an eyebrow, not in defiance, but in confusion. A stable, but then came the full weight of the task. These were not ordinary stalls. King Augeas possessed more cattle than any man in the known world, tens of thousands, sacred and unyielding. Their stables stretched for miles, filled with filth untouched for decades. The place was not just dirty, it was cursed, rancid, rotting, repugnant. And the task, while mundane in word, was Herculean in truth, because Eurystheus added, "Do it without help. Do it without magic. Do it before the sun sets." The labor sounded like mockery, but to the gods, it was a test of humility. Would Hercules, slayer of lions, conqueror of monsters, stoop to shovel dung? He did not hesitate. He set off for Elis. Before the morning mist had lifted, the smell hit him first. It was not just the stink of animals. It was history, the scent of time, of flesh and waste and forgotten tasks. He arrived before the sun had reached its zenith, greeted not with cheers, but with laughter. King Augeas, old and fat and wrapped in linens, squinted from his throne. "You're Hercules," he said, smirking. "You've killed hydras and boars, and now you've come to clean my stable." "Yes," said Hercules, his voice calm. Augeas chuckled. "If you succeed, I'll give you 1/10 of my herd. But mark my words, it can't be done." Hercules said nothing. Instead, he walked to the riverbanks. There, he stood for a long time, watching the flow of water, listening to its ancient voice. And then, in a moment of quiet brilliance, he made a choice. He would not shovel. He would not lift. He would not scrape the filth of years by hand. He would change the course of nature itself, using boulders the size of oxen, and strength, born of gods. Hercules tore into the earth. He dug trenches, reshaped the banks, and diverted the path of 2 mighty rivers, Alpheus and Peneus. He carved a new destiny with his hands, and the waters obeyed. They roared into the stables like twin serpents freed from their coils. They churned through the filth, sweeping away decades in a single surge. Muck poured out like blood from an ancient wound. The cattle scattered, the ground trembled, and by sunset, the stables were clean, not by brute force, but by cleverness. But when Hercules returned to Augeas for his reward, the king recoiled. "You cheated," he said. "You used rivers. That's not cleaning." "I used what the land gave me," Hercules replied. "I used my mind." But Eurystheus, warned by Hera, refused to count the labor. It didn't matter. The stables were clean, and Hercules walked away, head high, the sun behind him like a crown. But the next labor would return him to blood and feathers, to the marsh of death, to birds with iron wings and eyes like burning coals. Far to the north, nestled between cliffs and waterlogged woodlands, lay Lake Stymphalia. The marshes there were thick with reeds, dark with mist. But it was not the swamp that kept men away, it was what flew above it. The Stymphalian birds. No one knew where they had come from. Some said Ares himself had created them, birthed from war and hunger. They flew in flocks thick as storm clouds. Their feathers were bronze. Their beaks could pierce shields, and they hungered for flesh. They had driven entire villages into silence. Crops rotted, livestock vanished. Children were taken beneath the trees and never seen again. Even Eurystheus hesitated when naming the task. "Drive them away," he said, permanently. When Hercules arrived, he found the marsh quiet, too quiet. The water barely rippled. The trees stood bare and unmoving. But above, like a storm without rain, the sky pulsed with wings. They circled endlessly, waiting, watching. Hercules knew that strength alone would not save him. Arrows would fall short. Swords would never reach. And so, again, he turned to wit. The goddess Athena appeared to him in a grove, veiled in olive light. "You are not alone, son of Zeus," she said. "Use this." She handed him a small bronze rattle, simple, dull, unremarkable. "The sound will shake them," she said. "Not with pain, with fear." "Will they flee?" he asked. "They will scatter. What you do with the silence is up to you." And then she was gone. Hercules climbed a stone outcrop high above the marsh. He stood tall, lion skin wrapped around him, the bronze rattle in his hand, and he shook it. The sound was unlike any noise born of nature. It was sharp and jagged, like lightning made audible. It echoed through the valley, bounced off the mountains, cut through the sky. The birds screamed. They burst upward in a single wave, metal wings slicing air, shadows scattering, and Hercules struck. He launched arrows tipped in poison, each one true. He moved like wind, firing, spinning, roaring. Dozens fell. The sky rained feathers and iron, but he did not kill them all. He only needed to drive them away. And when they were gone, when the silence returned, he stood alone beneath a blood-red sky. The swamp was still. The task was done. Back in Tiryns, Eurystheus grumbled, "You didn't slay them all. You said remove," Hercules replied. And even Eurystheus, full of cowardice and envy, could not argue. Thus 2 more labors ended, one of filth, one of flight, both conquered not with rage, but with wisdom. And far above, Hera watched still, her anger ripening, her vengeance far from over. The Cretan bull and the mares of Diomedes. The sea winds carried a bitter scent when Eurystheus summoned Hercules again. There was something uneasy in the air, as if the world itself knew what came next would not be solved by might or wit alone, but by facing the monstrousness in men and in gods. Hera's influence was shifting. No longer content with sending beasts and riddles, she now guided Eurystheus with whispers of vengeance. And so the king spoke, his voice barely able to contain his disdain. "Go to Crete," he said. "Bring me the bull of Poseidon, alive." They called it the Cretan bull, but it was no mere animal. It was a creature born of divine betrayal, a punishment made flesh. Years before, Poseidon had sent the bull from the sea as a gift to King Minos, a sign of favor, a beast too pure and shining to be mortal. But Minos, greedy and proud, refused to sacrifice the bull back to the god of the sea. Instead, he kept it, chained in bronze, paraded it as his glory. Poseidon did not roar. He did not send storms. He sent madness. The bull broke its chains. Its eyes turned white with fury. It trampled fields, shattered temples, and drove men to suicide with its scream. Even Minos could not contain what he had stolen. Now it wandered the island, half shadow, half fury, a divine creature stripped of reason. That was the beast Hercules was sent to capture. He sailed for Crete beneath a copper sky, his hands resting quietly on the hilt of his club. The voyage was silent. The waves were still. Even the wind seemed reluctant. When he arrived, Minos greeted him not with welcome, but with shame. The once proud king now wore fear like a second skin. His palace, once golden, echoed with hollow footsteps. His wife said nothing. His children were hidden. "If you can take it," Minos said softly, "you may have it." He did not offer help. He only gave directions. The bull was in the northern hills, where trees were few and rocks jagged. Hercules followed the broken earth, the shattered branches, the scars in the land that marked the beast's path. He found it at dusk, silhouetted by the setting sun. It stood tall, gleaming white, muscles rippling beneath its skin like coiled ropes. Its horns curved like the crescent moon. Its breath steamed like smoke from a sacred pyre. It turned its head slowly and charged. There was no hesitation, no cry of rage, just force. Hercules met it head-on. They clashed in thunder. The ground split beneath their feet. Hercules was thrown once, twice, gored through his lion skin, blood-staining gold. But he rose. He dodged. He grasped the horns and he held, not to kill, but to master. The bull thrashed. It bucked. It bellowed. And Hercules tightened his grip not in anger, but in resolve. He whispered apologies to Poseidon, and then he brought the creature to its knees. He bound it with ropes soaked in sea brine, and led it, step by step, back to his ship. When he returned to Tiryns, the bull was still alive, snorting, staring, silent. Eurystheus took one look and fled to his bronze jar once more. Hercules let the bull go. It wandered off toward the mountains. Its madness did not follow, but there was no rest, no breath between labors. Before the blood dried on his skin, he was sent again, this time not across sea, but across shadow. "Go to Thrace," said Eurystheus to Diomedes. "Bring me his horses." A pause. Alive. Diomedes, king of the Bistones, was no ordinary tyrant. He was the son of Ares, god of war, and like his father, He reveled in violence. He ruled with a sword in one hand and a lash in the other. His land was rich in iron and blood. But it was not Diomedes' cruelty that made the earth tremble. It was his horses, the mares of Diomedes, 4 of them, great beasts of muscle and flame, hooves black as pitch, manes thick with ash. Their breath melted stone, and they did not eat grain. They ate flesh, human flesh. Diomedes fed them prisoners, slaves, even his own enemies. He considered them sacred, divine. Hercules arrived at night, cloaked in silence. He moved through the camp like a wind without shadow, and when he reached the stables, he stared into eyes that burned red in the dark. The mares screamed. Chains snapped. They lunged. Hercules wrestled the first to the ground, driving it into submission. The second bit his shoulder, tearing flesh. He grunted and slammed it against the wall. The third and fourth circled him, hungry, and then soldiers came. Dozens of them, swords drawn. Diomedes himself among them, wrapped in armor black as a thundercloud. You dare touch what is mine. He growled. Hercules turned, bleeding, eyes bright. They are not yours. Nothing that eats man should serve one. The battle was brutal, blood on snow, steel on skin. But Hercules had fought monsters born of gods. These were men. He broke them, one by one, until only Diomedes remained. They fought through the dark, through broken walls and trampled stone. Hercules struck with rage. Diomedes returned with fury. But strength alone could not save the son of Ares. Hercules took him, bound him, and threw him to his own mares. They devoured him in silence, and when they were finished, they were calm. Something in them changed, as if the taste of their master had broken the curse. Hercules led them away. He returned to Tiryns with 4 horses at his back, quiet, obedient, still dangerous, but changed. Eurystheus said nothing, only stared, lips pressed into a line. Hercules turned again and walked toward the next labor, his steps heavy with blood, but never slowing. The girdle of Hippolyta. There are many ways a hero may be tested by claw and fang, by flame and stone, but sometimes the hardest challenge is not against a monster, but against misunderstanding, against envy, and against the poisoned whispers of gods. When Hercules returned from Thrace, dragging behind him the blood-washed mares of Diomedes, Eurystheus was quiet. The fire in his eyes had not gone out, but it had turned inward, burning colder, sharper. This time, he did not yell, he did not scoff. He simply said, "Go to the land of the Amazons. Bring me the girdle of Hippolyta." And then he turned away. The girdle, a belt of golden thread and sacred magic, was no ordinary ornament. It had been given to Queen Hippolyta by Ares, god of war himself, her father, her patron, her blood. It was said to carry power not of weaponry, but of command. With it, Hippolyta ruled her tribe not with fear, but with reverence. Her warriors followed her, not because they were told, but because they believed, and now Hercules was sent to take it, not by war, Eurystheus had said, but by bringing it back, alive. The journey to Themyscira, the land of the Amazons, took many days. Hercules traveled by ship with a small band of warriors, not for battle, but for diplomacy, should the task demand more than strength. The wind carried with it rumors that the Amazons lived without men, that they forged arrows with dragon bone, that no male had entered their lands and left whole. But Hercules did not fear myth. He was myth. He arrived on a morning red with sunlight, the shore quiet, the forests beyond silent. And then they came, dozens of them, mounted on horses, so swift they seemed to glide across the sand. Spears held high but not thrown. They circled the ship, arrows notched but not loosed. They did not speak, and then Hippolyta came forward. She did not wear a crown, only a leather cuirass, and the golden girdle across her waist, shining like woven lightning. She dismounted with the grace of a lioness, her eyes fixed on Hercules. There was no fear, only curiosity. "You are the one they call Hercules?" she asked. "I am," he said, bowing his head slightly, not in submission, but in respect. She studied him for a long time. Then she spoke. "Why are you here?" Hercules did not lie. He told her of Eurystheus, of the labors, of the crimes that bound him to this endless path. He spoke not with excuses, but with truth, and she listened. To his surprise, she did not laugh. She did not mock. She did not prepare for war. She simply nodded and said, "Then I will give it to you." There was a stunned silence among her warriors, but Hippolyta raised a hand. "You do not come with weapons drawn. You do not come for conquest. You came with honesty, and that is rare. If this will free you," she said, "then I give it willingly." It should have ended there, a tale of peace, of dignity, of mutual respect between warrior and queen. But above them, hidden in the clouds, Hera watched, and Hera seethed. She had waited for failure. She had crafted labors laced with venom. And now, seeing Hercules succeed by kindness, she turned to deception. That night, as the Amazon camp celebrated with fires and soft wine, Hera took the form of an Amazon. She whispered into the ears of Hippolyta's warriors, "The man is here to steal your queen. He lies. He has enchanted her." The poison spread quickly. By moonrise, the camp was divided. Spears once lowered were raised again. Arrows once unstrung were pulled taut with fury. The whispers had become a scream, and Hercules, sitting by the fire with Hippolyta, saw it happen too late. The first spear was thrown by a woman who had once laughed. It struck the ground beside him. The second came for his chest. He stood, shield raised, confused, shouting, "Stop! This is not what I came for." But they did not listen. They charged, and Hippolyta, eyes wide with betrayal not of Hercules, but of her sisters, drew her sword. "No," she cried. "He is not our enemy." But the line had broken, and war spilled like blood in the chaos. Hercules defended himself. He struck only to disable, to deflect. But the Amazons were trained for war, and war they brought. The forest rang with steel and cries. In the center of it all, Hippolyta tried to hold the line, and it was then by Hera's design that she fell. An arrow, blind and mad, pierced her side. She gasped, and Hercules caught her as she fell. Her hand gripped his forearm, blood warm between them. "I did not want this," she whispered. "Nor did I," he said. She smiled once, and died. Silence fell. The Amazons stopped. They saw their queen fallen not to an invader, but to their own hand, moved by lies. Some dropped their weapons, some wept, and some turned their eyes to the sky, as if they, too, felt the weight of a goddess watching from above. Hercules did not speak. He did not scream. He wrapped Hippolyta's body in linen, burned it with honor, and took the girdle not as a trophy, but as a tombstone. When he returned to Tiryns, Eurystheus greeted him with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "You succeeded," he said. "No," Hercules replied. "I lost another innocent to the games of gods." He placed the girdle before the throne and left the hall in silence. Another labor completed, another wound that would never heal, and Hera, watching, still smiled in the dark. The cattle of Geryon. When the girdle of Hippolyta was placed at the feet of Eurystheus, the court of Tiryns grew still. Some said Hercules had stolen it. Others whispered that he had killed a queen, but none spoke to his face. They feared him, not just for his strength, but for the shadows he carried now. And Eurystheus, who had long hoped to break him, simply said, "Now go west, beyond the rivers, beyond the sands, beyond the edge of the earth. There, find Geryon, and bring me his cattle." There was no fanfare, no farewell, only the west and the silence of a man walking toward the end of the world, the land of Erytheia, where Geryon kept his herds, lay past the bounds of mortal maps, a crimson island bathed in perpetual dusk, guarded not just by distance, but by danger. There were no roads, only the desert, and so Hercules walked. He passed over mountains where even the vultures dared not land. He crossed plains so dry, the bones of beasts turned to dust beneath his feet. His skin burned, his lips cracked, and still he walked. Days bled into weeks. The sky grew hotter. The sun no longer watched it scorched. And at last, in the heart of that endless fire, Hercules dropped to his knees. He was not invincible. He was tired and angry, and for the first time, he looked upward not in prayer, but in challenge. "You burn me, Helios," he said through gritted teeth. "And for what? To prove I'm not a god." He raised his fist and shouted, "If you wish to stop me, then come down from the sky and try." The desert held its breath, and then, to Hercules' astonishment, the sun answered. Helios, god of the sun, paused in his path, and from the light, he appeared not wrathful, not amused, but curious. He stood before Hercules as a man cloaked in fire, eyes blazing, skin made of light. "Few have spoken to me as you have," he said. "Fewer still have survived my gaze." Hercules did not kneel. He met the sun's eyes, and Helios smiled. "Then take this," he said, "if you must go where no mortal has gone." He handed Hercules a golden cup, a vessel so vast it could carry a man across the sea, the very chariot he used to sail the sky. And just like that, Helios was gone. Hercules climbed into the cup, and the wind took him over the ocean, past the edge of the world, to the red island of Erythea. He landed on black sand. The sky above was always twilight. In the distance, great herds of red cattle grazed beneath the shadows of a towering keep, watched not by shepherds, but by monsters. First came Orpheus, a two-headed dog with fangs like daggers and a hide that could not be pierced. It charged before Hercules had stepped twice onto the land, but Hercules was ready. He struck it once with a blow so fierce the earth cracked beneath its body. Then came Eurydice, a giant herdsman clad in iron, wielding a spear forged in the fires of war. He bellowed with rage and threw the spear with the force of a thunderclap. Hercules caught it, snapped it, and crushed the herdsman beneath his heel. And then came Geryon. He was not a man, not truly. He had 3 bodies fused at the waist, 3 arms on each side, 3 heads that spoke in unison. His voice echoed like a choir of war. "You've come far, son of Zeus, but you will go no further." He raised his blade, a great sword as tall as a tree, and advanced. The battle that followed shook the roots of the island. Each body of Geryon fought as if it were a god, one swung with fury, one with precision, one with blind rage. Hercules dodged, blocked, struck. The sword clashed against his club. Blood stained the sand. But Hercules had fought hydras, had faced Cerberus, had survived the Underworld's gaze. And Geryon, for all his bodies, had only one heart, with a cry that tore the dusk in 2. Hercules drove his blade through all 3 chests. The monster screamed and fell. The red cattle scattered, but Hercules gathered them. Slowly, patiently, he herded them across the sea in Helios's golden cup, sailing east as the stars blinked awake. He returned the cup to the sun when he reached land, and from there he walked. The journey home was not easy. Bandits tried to steal the cattle. Rivers blocked his path. At one point, Hera sent a gadfly to sting the cattle into a frenzy, scattering them across the hills. Hercules chased them for days, roaring into the valleys, gathering them one by one. But at last, he returned to Tiryns, bloodied, burnt, exhausted, triumphant. Eurystheus counted them, all there, and for the first time, the king said nothing at all, only looked at the man before him not as a cousin, not as a threat, but as something else, something inevitable. The apples of the Hesperides, There are tasks of strength. There are trials of blood. And then there are quests that cross into the realm of the divine, where even gods tread carefully, and where one false word can doom a mortal for eternity. This was such a quest. The oracle had spoken again. The 11th labor would send Hercules beyond the reach of maps, to a place where night never fully lifts and time breathes slowly. Eurystheus delivered the command with a gleam in his eye. Bring me the golden apples of the Hesperides. Simple words, but their weight could split the world. The apples were not mere fruit. They were gifts from Gaia, the earth herself, to Hera, on the day of her wedding to Zeus, planted in a hidden garden at the edge of the world. They were said to grant immortality to those who tasted them. The garden was guarded by the Hesperides maidens of twilight and by Ladon, a dragon coiled around the tree, with 100 heads and no sleep. No man had ever seen this garden and returned, but Hercules did not flinch. He only asked, "Where do I begin?" No one could tell him. Even the oracle had spoken in riddles. Seek where Atlas kneels. Speak where the sky is held. And so he wandered through deserts, where the wind spoke only in curses, through mountains crowned with storms, through lands where the stars themselves seemed closer than the earth. He asked the wisest men of Egypt, the priests of Phoenicia, the monks of Delphi. None knew, until one day, beneath a lonely cliff on the Libyan coast, Hercules encountered a man of stone. He did not breathe. He did not blink. He was Prometheus, chained by Zeus, bound to eternal torment. His liver devoured daily by an eagle as punishment for giving fire to men. Hercules watched the eagle descend, watched it tear, watched Prometheus writhe in agony but remain silent. And when the bird flew, belly full of divine flesh, Hercules stepped forward. "I can end this," he said. Prometheus looked up, his eyes filled not with hope, but disbelief. Hercules raised his bow, dipped the arrow in the venom of the Hydra, and when the eagle returned, he loosed it. The arrow pierced the creature's heart. It died before it could scream. Prometheus gasped, as though tasting breath for the first time in centuries. "You are Hercules," he said. "I am," came the reply. "Then you seek the garden." Hercules nodded. Prometheus smiled. "You won't find it, but Atlas can." Atlas, the Titan who held up the sky, condemned by Zeus after the war with the Olympians. He stood at the edge of the world, his arms raised, his back bowed, shoulders bearing the heavens so they would not crush the earth. Hercules followed the whispers of wind and stars until he found him, a mountain shaped like a man shaped like punishment. Atlas did not look at him. He only said, "Why are you here?" "I seek the golden apples," Hercules replied. A low laugh rumbled from the Titan's chest. "And you think I will fetch them for you? You know where they are." "I do." "I will hold the sky," said Hercules, "if you will go." At last, Atlas turned. Eyes like burning suns met his, and slowly he stepped away. The weight of the cosmos fell onto Hercules' shoulders. It was unlike any burden he had borne, not heavy in body but in eternity. It pressed down not just on his bones, but on his thoughts. The stars whispered, the winds howled, the entire sky trembled above him, and he held it not with his arms, but with his soul. And in that stillness, he waited, minutes, hours, days, he could not tell, until, at last, Atlas returned. In his hands, 3 apples golden, glowing, humming with divine life. "They are yours," said Atlas. "Take them to your king." But he did not offer to relieve Hercules of the sky. Instead, he smiled. "I think I'll deliver them myself. You stay here. It's not so bad." Hercules' fingers tightened against the vault of heaven. He smiled back. "Very well, but do me one kindness first. Hold the sky again, just for a moment, so I may adjust my cloak. Then you can go." Atlas chuckled. Of course. He stepped forward, raised his arms, and Hercules moved swift as thought and stepped aside. The sky crashed down onto Atlas's back once more. The Titan roared, but it was done. Hercules took the apples and walked away. He returned to Tiryns, the golden fruit cradled in cloth. When Eurystheus saw them, his mouth hung open. Immortality, he whispered. Hercules said nothing. Later, at the command of the gods, he returned the apples to the garden where no mortal hand would touch them again, because even he knew immortality was not for mortals, not even for him. The capture of Cerberus. There are trials that test the body. There are trials that test the mind. But only once does a mortal face a trial that tests the soul. 12 labors had been spoken. 11 had been completed. And now Eurystheus gave the final command not with confidence, but with dread. Go, he said, into the land of the dead, and return with Cerberus, the hound of Hades. Not a token, not a tale. Bring the monster itself, Lyre. Cerberus was no ordinary beast. He was born of monsters, Echidna and Typhon, spawn of chaos. He guarded the gates of the Underworld, where the souls of the dead passed and did not return. 3 heads, eyes like burning coals, jaws that snapped the bones of ghosts. Even gods did not walk lightly in his realm. And now, a man, a demigod. Yes, but still mortal would descend. Hercules did not speak when the task was given. He only looked west and began walking. He passed through Argos, through Arcadia, to the cave of Taenarum, the sacred mouth of Hades, hidden at the edge of the world, where sunlight dared not touch stone. The wind stopped, the air grew cold, and still he stepped forward. No shield, no club, only his lion skin and his strength, and the memory of those he had lost. He entered the darkness, and the world closed behind him. The underworld was not fire, it was not torment, it was silence, the kind that sits behind the eyes. He walked through fields where the dead drifted like smoke, some weeping, some laughing, some simply fading. They did not speak to him. They recognized him. Even in death, stories lived, and Hercules was one of them. He came to the river Styx, black as oil, still as sleep. At its bank waited Charon, the ferryman cloaked in shadow, face hidden beneath time. He said nothing. He only raised a hand. Hercules had no coin, so instead, he lifted his lyre and played, not with beauty, not with brilliance, with truth, a song of labors, of loss, of love left behind, a song of Megara, of children who would never grow old, of blood that had dried but never vanished. When he finished, the boat appeared, and Charon ferried him across. On the other side stood Thanatos Death himself, cloaked in wings of night, his eyes ancient, empty. He did not speak. He only nodded. Even death must honor a vow. Finally, Hercules came to the gates. There, chained in shadows, snarling through blood and bone, stood Cerberus. 3 heads, 3 voices, 1 fury. He rose before Hercules like a tower of muscle and hatred, and Hercules stepped forward not with weapon, but with hands. I do not come to slay, he said, only to prove that no gate is closed to a man with purpose. They fought. If it could be called fighting, it was chaos. Teeth and fists, roars and silence. Cerberus lunged. Hercules caught his central throat and twisted. The other 2 heads bit and tore at his arm, at his side, but he held. He wrapped the lion skin around his chest, using it as shield and net, and dragged the beast downward. Cerberus thrashed. His claws ripped the earth, but Hercules did not let go. Even as his vision blurred, as blood filled his mouth, he whispered, "You will not stop me. I have walked through pain far deeper." And at last, the beast stilled, not tamed, not broken, but acknowledging. Cerberus bowed, and Hercules led him, bound not in chains, but in resolve. back to the light. The dead parted as they passed. Even Persephone watched in silence. Even Hades allowed it. One man, one monster, and the long walk back through death. He emerged into daylight, blinking, bleeding, but alive. Behind him, Cerberus followed, snarling, snapping at the wind, but leashed by awe. When Eurystheus saw the beast, he screamed. He fled into his bronze jar and did not come out for 3 days. When he did, Cerberus was gone, returned by Hercules to the underworld, and the labor was done. 12 had been commanded, 12 had been completed. No man before or after would ever bear such weight. But Hercules did not celebrate, because even now he knew the gods were not yet done with him, and fate would not release his name from its lips. Not yet. Redemption and tragedy. The labors were done. 12 burdens carved into legend. Hercules stood at the summit of his journey, no longer just the strongest of mortals, but a symbol woven into the fabric of fate itself. Kings who once doubted him now trembled in his presence. Cities sang his name. Even Eurystheus, his tormentor, dared not look him in the eye. But Hercules felt no peace. He did not return to the life he had known. He did not return to Megara, because she was gone, by his own hands, and no number of monsters slain, no golden apples retrieved. No gates broken in the underworld could undo that. The 12 labors were not a victory. They were atonement. And though he was free, he would never be whole. He wandered again, not for quests, not for glory, but to quiet the war inside his chest. For years he roamed the lands, helping when he could, fighting when he must, but never lingering, until one day, in the kingdom of Calydon, he met a woman whose fire burned with its own sorrow. Her name was Deianira. She was no goddess, no Amazon queen, but her words had weight, and her gaze held neither awe nor fear. He married her, and for a time, however brief, he was happy. But the past has a long memory, and gods do not forget. As they traveled through the land of Trachis, Hercules encountered a centaur, Nessus, who ferried travelers across a wide river. Hercules crossed first. Then Nessus offered to carry Deianira, but as they reached the other bank, Nessus betrayed him, gripping her tightly, whispering filth, preparing to take what was not his. Hercules, from the far shore, acted without hesitation. He drew his bow and fired. The arrow dipped in the poison of the Hydra, struck true. Nessus fell, but before he died, he smiled and whispered into Deianira's ear, "Take my blood. It will keep him faithful." A love charm, a promise. Then he died, and the trap was set. Years passed, but the seed of doubt grows slowly. Deianira loved Hercules, but he was adored by all. Women watched him with hungry eyes. Songs were sung of his beauty, his might. And one day, as he prepared to journey to a foreign court, she remembered the blood. She soaked a tunic in it, just as Nessus had said, and gave it to Hercules. "Wear this," she said, "for protection." He smiled. He kissed her, and left. He never reached his destination. The moment he donned the tunic, the pain began. It was not fire. It was worse. The poison seeped into his skin, into his blood, into his bones. It burned from within, devouring muscle, eating into nerve. He screamed, tore at the cloth, but it could not be removed. It clung like guilt, like memory, like fate. He fell to his knees atop Mount Oeta, the agony tearing his soul apart. He knew what was happening. He knew the poison. He had used it, and now it was his end. He built a pyre of wood, laid himself upon it, and waited for death. But none dared light the fire, until a stranger, a shepherd named Philoctetes, stepped forward, and with shaking hands, struck the flame. The fire rose, and with it, the man. The skin burned, the muscle cracked, the blood boiled. But even as the body turned to ash, the soul rose higher. Zeus himself, watching from Olympus, spoke. "Enough. In a thunderclap that silenced the world, the flames parted, and Hercules, son of man, son of God, ascended. He was granted immortality, a seat among the stars, a place beside the gods. His pain was ended, his burden lifted, and Hera, who had hunted him from birth at last, released her hate. She welcomed him to Olympus as a god, but mortals still remember the man, the one who suffered, who killed what he loved, who walked through death, who wrestled with grief and rage and silence. They remember not the god he became, but the human he was. And so ends the tale of Heracles, the man who labored not to win, but to atone, a man of impossible strength, a heart too scarred to heal, and a name that, to this day, echoes across time. Hercules, before pursuit turned to myth and love hardened into legend. There was Apollo, radiant god of light, music, poetry, and prophecy, son of Zeus. Twin to Artemis, crowned by the sun itself, his arrival into the world had been no quiet thing. Born to the Titaness, Leto on the sacred floating island of Delos, after Hera's jealous wrath had driven her across the earth, Apollo came into existence not with a whimper, but with a golden cry that silenced the wind and made the earth pause to listen. Even as a newborn, his presence exuded divinity. Laurel leaves bowed to him, the sun burned brighter, and a hymn seemed to rise from the very stones beneath his mother's feet. Apollo was everything the poets would dream of, with golden hair that shimmered like flame, and eyes that saw into the soul of the world. He carried himself with the ease of a creature born into adoration. He walked the halls of Olympus not as a god among others, but as the very embodiment of divine perfection. The lyre, gifted to him by Hermes, was a part of his being. Its strings answered only to him, each note blooming like firelight in the hearts of those who heard. When he played, even the muses stopped to listen, and the rivers slowed to carry the sound further. He was beloved across the earth. Mortals built temples in his name, painted his image on ceramic and marble, prayed to him for harvest, for healing, for light. His domain stretched from the heights of Olympus to the sacred site of Delphi, where his oracle whispered the truths of gods to the trembling hands of kings. His arrows could kill monsters, but they could also heal plague. His voice could move armies. His judgment was revered. He was Apollo, and the world basked in his glow. Yet beneath that brilliance lived a shadow, because what could the god of all things possibly fear? Nothing, it seemed, and perhaps that was the flaw, for in his certainty, in his divine self-assurance, Apollo mocked what he could not control, what he believed beneath him, love. It happened after he had slain Python, the great earth dragon who once coiled around the navel of the world. With the beast's death, Apollo claimed Delphi as his own, consecrating the site with laurel and hymns. Victory coursed through him like sunlight. The other gods praised him, mortals celebrated, and Apollo, at the height of his triumph, cast his gaze down to see a boy with golden curls and wings of mist standing beside a riverbank. Eros, the god of love, small, delicate, mischievous. Apollo scoffed. "What are you doing with those arrows, child?" he asked, eyes gleaming with the pride of conquest. "Leave them to real gods. Mine strike down monsters. Yours only tangle hearts." Eros looked up, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous, understanding. He twirled his bow in his fingers and said only, "Perhaps, but your arrows may kill. Apollo, mine bring gods to their knees." Apollo laughed, tossed his head back, and turned away, unconcerned. Eros, still smiling, rose silently into the sky. From his quiver, he pulled 2 arrows, one tipped in gold, gleaming with a warm, irresistible glow, the arrow of passion, of obsession, of consuming love, the other, dull, gray, heavy, the leaden arrow of revulsion, resistance. and eternal retreat. He did not say when he would use them, only that he would, and the world, caught between them, would never be the same, far from Olympus, in a grove where moonlight passed softly through cypress branches. A young woman ran barefoot, the earth giving way beneath her light steps like it knew her name. Daphne, a naiad, daughter of the river god Peneus, born not in fire or thunder, but in the quiet hush of flowing water and leaves in motion. Her spirit was not tamed, her heart not easily moved. She belonged to the wilds, to the wind between trees, to the songs of birds and the cool hush of shade. She was more than beautiful. She was freedom, made flesh. From the time she came of age, suitors had circled like bees to nectar, men with gold, sons of kings, minor deities with roses in hand. Even Pan had tried, whispering music through the reeds of his pipes, his goat legs tangling behind her. But she was faster. She laughed as she ran, always just out of reach, always slipping away. To her father, she said, "Let me be as Artemis is untouched, unclaimed, forever running beneath the open sky." And though Peneus loved his daughter, and though his river ran with wisdom deeper than many gods, he feared, for no vow made so boldly before the heavens ever ended gently. But he granted it, and Daphne ran on. On Olympus, Apollo rose from his slumber, and felt a pulse deep within him, a sudden, roaring wave of hunger, longing, desire, not desire as mortals knew it, but something burning like prophecy. His vision blurred, and in the surface of his pool he saw her, dark eyes, wild hair, limbs like sunlight flickering through forest branches, a spirit unbound, a flame that did not ask to be admired, and he was struck. The golden arrow had found him. Desire poured through him like the rising sun breaking the horizon. His breath hitched, his lyre fell silent. He whispered, "Who are you?" But the answer came from within him. He rose, glowing, burning, bursting with need not of conquest, but of adoration. He must find her, speak to her, win her. Below, Daphne paused mid-run. Her breath caught. A chill danced along her spine. She turned her head, as if someone had whispered her name, but the forest was silent. Still, she felt it an invisible gaze, hot as noon sunlight, pressing against her skin, and something inside her recoiled. She did not know the source. She did not know the name, but something old and wise in her bones told her to run. She placed her palm to a tree and whispered, "Father, something is coming." And far above, Eros hovered unseen between them, arms crossed, his work already done. He said nothing. His arrows had already chosen, and he, the god of love, had done what no warrior could. He had made the mighty Apollo fall. Now all that remained was the chase, and its ending. The wind that wound through the forests of Thessaly carried more than just the scent of pine and the murmur of leaves. It carried fate, sharp and silent, cloaked in gold and lead. In the days that followed, Apollo's glimpse of Daphne, the god of light, found himself caught in something he had never known. Restlessness, not the kind born of boredom, but of hunger, longing, the ache of desire that settles in the bones like fire without flame. His nights were no longer restful. His dreams, once filled with muses, melodies, and oracles, were now haunted by the rustling of leaves and the flash of a wild girl's eyes darting through the trees. His thoughts, once fixed on prophecy and glory, now wandered helplessly toward the image of her, Daphne, the untouchable, the free. He did not know how to approach her. He, the golden sun, who had never needed to pursue anything before. He, who had slain monsters, built temples, and silenced chaos itself with the music of his lyre. And yet now, he trembled at the idea of speaking to a girl whose heart beat not for glory or power, but for the woods. Elsewhere, in the quieter corners of Olympus, Eros watched. He was no titan, no thunder wielder. His wings were small, his hands delicate, but he was love, and that meant he was dangerous. The gods often mistook him for a child, a fluttering trickster with a bow too large for his frame. They whispered of his mischief, of the chaos he sowed. They laughed when his arrows struck mortals, making kings forsake thrones and queens weep for shepherds. But Eros was not small. He was eternal. He was older than Olympus, older than reason. He had watched stars die from longing. He had seen wars rise because two hearts refused to speak, and when Apollo, the proud god of sunlight and order, had dared to mock him after the slaying of Python, Eros had made no reply. He had simply taken to the sky. Now, hidden among clouds, he hovered above both god and nymph, the last two pieces of a myth still unfolding. In his hands, he held two arrows, one long and radiant, the tip gleaming with gold, crafted to ignite a love so overwhelming it consumed all logic, all restraint. The other, shorter and dull, tipped with lead, cold and cruel, made to freeze the heart against affection, to turn desire into revulsion. Eros had fired them both, and now he watched the story unwind. Apollo had been struck first, his golden blood boiling with longing, with obsession. The more he saw of Daphne, the more his divine soul twisted in need. He followed her at a distance, not daring to speak, watching as she laughed with deer, as she bathed beneath waterfalls, as she knocked arrows at imaginary prey, with the precision of Artemis herself. To him, she was perfection. To her, he was terror. For Daphne had been struck too. She had felt it the moment their eyes had met. A shiver, not of desire, but of aversion. Her heart, once calm as a still pond, thrashed like a caged animal. Her breath shortened when she heard his name. Her skin burned at the thought of his touch. Her dreams turned restless. She no longer slept beneath the stars. She ran. Every time Apollo drew near, she fled deeper into the forests. When he sent songs through the wind, she blocked her ear. When he tried to speak, her steps quickened. He called out once, soft and pleading, "Please, wait, I only wish to know your name." But she vanished, between the trees like smoke on the breeze. Apollo was bewildered. Had she not heard the songs he sang? Had she not seen the offerings he left near the riverbank? The garlands, the flutes carved from crystal, the fruits kissed by sunlight. I would crown her in starlight. He murmured to the wind. I would give her eternal youth, safety, love beyond measure. But the wind gave no answer. Daphne, meanwhile, pressed deeper into the wilderness. She avoided the glades where he had once appeared. Now favoring shaded hollows and wild thickets, she prayed not to Aphrodite, goddess of love, but to Artemis, goddess of the hunt, of chastity, of independence. "Let me be as you are," she whispered, free, untouched, unclaimed. But no answer came from Artemis either, only the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of a lyre. Apollo was not cruel. He did not seek to possess her through force, but the arrow's magic clouded his reason. It twisted his divine nature into something more human, desperate, obsessive, blind. He followed her through the seasons, always just out of reach. When she stopped to drink at a spring, he waited behind trees. When she wept by her father's river, he watched. His heart breaking with longing he did not understand. And through it all, Eros watched as well. There was no satisfaction in his eyes, only gravity. He knew what he had set in motion. The gods often toyed with mortals, but Eros dealt with truth, and truth, once loosed, could not be unspoken. One day, as Apollo watched Daphne run barefoot across a glade, her hair flying behind her like a banner of rebellion, he whispered, "I would give up Olympus for her. I would burn my temples, silence my lyre, cast away the sun, if only she would let me love her." But she could not, would not. The leaden arrow did its work with silent efficiency. It did not twist her into hatred. It gave her clarity. It let her feel the truth without distortion, that love, when forced, is not love at all. And so she ran, not just from Apollo, but from everything that threatened her freedom. On the highest ridge of Mount Oeta, Eros finally descended. He sat alone beneath a laurel tree, the same kind that would, in time, become legend, and laid his bow across his lap. He did not smile. His arrows had struck, his power had been proven, but in his heart a sadness stirred. For even gods, he knew, do not always win when love is involved. He reached into his quiver and pulled the last of his golden arrows. It shimmered in the fading light. Then, slowly, he snapped it in half. In the days that followed, Apollo grew frantic. He sent songs into the sky, hoping they would find her. He carved verses into bark. He painted her face in clouds and tried to call her name with the wind. But Daphne remained elusive. He began to descend more often into the mortal realm, walking among forests and rivers, no longer shining so brightly, no longer singing so proudly. He had become a god in love, a contradiction, a wound with a crown. The sun still rose each morning, but it was no longer Apollo who drove it with pride. It was a duty now, a chore. Each day he searched. Each day she slipped further from his reach, and in the whispering leaves he heard the voice of Eros. Faint but undeniable. Now you understand. Not all hearts bow to power. Not all desire burns equally. Love, when unreturned, becomes a prayer without an altar. She moved like the wind swift, unseen, and never still. Daphne, daughter of the river god Peneus, was not born to be watched, touched, or worshipped. She was not sculpted to become a wife, a queen, or a muse for men to immortalize in marble. She was born of water and earth. Her spirit poured into the quiet places between trees, into the cool hush of mountain shade, into the forgotten hollows of wild groves. She belonged to no temple, no man, no future scripted by others. From the time she was old enough to speak, she made her vow, I will not be claimed, not by man, not by God. It was not rebellion. It was not defiance. It was truth. She found no joy in the robes and perfumes her handmaidens brought her. Her joy came from morning light spilling through pine needles, the scent of bark, the thrill of the hunt. She could strike a running stag through the heart at 50 paces, leap from rock to rock across white water, and weave a crown of leaves more beautiful than any goldsmith's work. The others whispered about her, naiads, dryads, even minor gods. They spoke of her beauty, yes, but with a note of frustration. She is like Artemis, they said, all grace, no softness, all wildness, no warmth. But Daphne did not care. When suitors came, she turned her back. When her father urged her gently to consider marriage, she only shook her head. I will never wear a veil, she said. I will never lie in a man's bed. I will never be what they want me to be. Her father, Peneus, who had carved rivers through stone and shaped valleys with his hands, looked upon his daughter and sighed. Even the gods, he said, do not defy the tides of love forever. And Daphne answered, then let them drown. She ran. Every day she ran, not from fear, but for the freedom of movement, the joy of silence. Her world was made of bark and breeze, of dew on moss, of sparrows fluttering from branch to branch. Her companions were the trees, who never asked questions, and the wind, which never held her back. But something had changed. Lately, the air felt different, heavy, watched. At first, she thought it was her imagination, a whisper too loud, a shadow moving too still. But then, she heard his voice, soft at first, distant, like a melody on the edge of sleep. Daphne, it said. She froze. No one should know her name in the deep wood. Not here. She turned. No one. She ran again, faster now. But the voice followed. I mean no harm. It said, only a word, only a moment. And she knew then it was him, the one she had seen once, cloaked in golden light, standing on the edge of her glade, the one whose gaze burned not with hunger, but with something stranger, need. He did not touch her. He did not speak then, but now he spoke through the leaves, the wind, the sunlight that filtered too warmly through the branches. Apollo, god of sun, music, reason, and now desire. Daphne knew of the gods. She had seen what they did to girls who caught their gaze. She had watched nymphs vanish from the woods, their names swallowed by stories told in Olympus. Some were taken as brides, others became animals. Trees, rivers, some never returned at all. There was no safety in beauty, not when the gods could twist love into chains. She had no delusion about Apollo's pursuit. He called it love, but she saw the truth behind his golden eyes. Desperation, yes, but also ownership. He wanted her to be his music, his prize, his answer to the ache that burned in him since Eros loosed his golden arrow. And Daphne, she wanted only to breathe. One evening, she sat by the edge of a pool, her feet dangling in the water, the sky glowing with the last hints of dusk. Her reflection trembled on the surface, young, free, untouched. But she saw something else in that reflection now. Fear, not just of Apollo, but of what the world would make her if she stopped running. She touched her collarbone, imagined a hand there. She recoiled. No, she whispered. Not me, not ever. The water rippled, and her father rose. Peneus, the river god, emerged like mist from the surface, his beard of reeds, his voice as deep as the current beneath mountains. You called me, daughter. Daphne did not turn away. He's coming, she said. I know. I can't stop him. Peneus was silent. You told me even the gods yield to love, she said bitterly. I told you love can drown. Then save me. Peneus looked at her, eyes ancient and carved by centuries of flowing sorrow. There is a way. She nodded. Then do it. You will not be you. Not entirely. I'd rather be roots and bark than breath and fear. The water swirled, and her father touched her brow. That night, Apollo walked the forest paths, his lyre hung at his side, untouched. He did not sing. He called her name. Daphne. No answer. He followed the trail she often took. He knew it now as well as he knew the constellations. The crushed grass, the prints in the soil, the broken twigs. He came to the glade. She was there, still, waiting. A strange calm settled over him. She turned to him, eyes wide, wild, not afraid, but final. I cannot be yours, she said. I would give you anything. He said, even silence. You would still be a god, and I would still lose myself. I would love you forever. That's what I'm afraid of. She turned and ran, and this time, he chased. Through trees, through rivers, through moonlight and shadow, his golden robes tangled in branches, her hair streamed behind her like smoke. He shouted. She did not answer. He wept. She did not slow, and when she reached the foot of her father's river, she fell to her knees and cried. Now, please, now. Apollo reached her in that moment. He touched her shoulder, and her skin began to change. There are moments in a god's life that shift the heavens. Not battles, not victories, but moments so quiet, so small, they go unnoticed by Olympus, yet they change eternity. For Apollo, that moment was a glance, not a war cry, not a hymn, not even a word, just a glance. The first time he truly saw Daphne, she was standing in a clearing, her back half turned, her bow at her side. The sun filtered through the leaves above her, and where it touched her skin, it lingered, as if the light itself wished to stay. Her hair caught the breeze, long and dark and wild, like a river that refused its banks. Apollo, hidden just beyond the tree line, watched. He had come to the forest expecting another glimpse, another fleeting shadow between the trees. He hadn't expected to find her so still, so unaware, so real. And in that heartbeat, when her eyes flicked toward the sound of a bird overhead, and their gaze met his for a single, electrified second, the arrow of Eros buried itself deeper into his heart. His chest tightened, his breath caught. A warmth bloomed inside him, not like the warmth of the sun he drove across the sky each day. No, this was different. This warmth burned. Daphne saw him too. Just briefly, a flicker of golden hair between branches, a figure far too still to be a mortal man. The air changed, charged, watchful. She turned her head fully, heart quickening, not with wonder, but with warning. It was him again, the god, the one who trailed her like light through trees. The moment their eyes met, she felt it again, the cold pulse of Eros's second arrow, the one tipped in lead. It wasn't hatred, it wasn't fear, it was worse, it was repulsion. She didn't see a suitor, she saw a trap, not a man, but a fate, a destiny that wanted to take her name, her body, her wildness, and twist it into something neat and owned. She turned sharply and ran. Apollo stepped forward. "Wait," he called, his voice like sunlight cracking through clouds. "Please." But the trees had already swallowed her. This had become a pattern now. He followed her not to catch, but to be close, at least. That's what he told himself. He left her gifts, garlands of laurel, melodies played on strings strung with silver, honeyed figs, and crystal jars filled with sunlight, trapped at dawn. But she never touched them. Birds sang near her, deer approached her, even wolves lowered their heads when she passed. But not Apollo. She would not allow it. He wasn't a part of her world, and yet he watched and longed. One day, unable to bear the silence, Apollo stepped into her path. It was at the edge of a stream, where water lapped lazily at stone, and reeds swayed to a wind that had no name. Daphne had bent to drink, cupping water in her palms. She looked up. He was there, golden, tall, barefoot, no lyre, no crown, only a softened face and trembling voice. "I do not want to harm you," he said. Daphne rose, the water slipping from her hands. "I never said you did," she answered, voice calm as flint. "I only want to speak." She narrowed her eyes. "Gods don't speak, they claim." Apollo took a step closer, arms open. "Let me prove I am not like the others." "You already are," she whispered. "I've seen what men do, what gods do, what happens to girls like me when the heavens take notice." He faltered. "I would never." "Wouldn't you?" Her voice rose like a storm building behind the hills. "Even now, you're chasing me. Even now, you try to remake me with words like gift and love. You see me not as I am, but as something you're meant to have." Apollo took a step back, wounded not by her words, but by their truth. "I didn't ask for this," he said. "Neither did I." They stood in silence. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath. "I love you," he finally said. Quietly, Daphne's face hardened. "You don't know me, but I want to. That's not love. That's desire dressed in poetry." She walked past him, her footsteps leaving no trace, and Apollo stood there long after she was gone, the wind wrapping around him like a cloak too heavy to bear. That night, Apollo wandered alone. He no longer glowed. He no longer played. He no longer sang. He walked barefoot over stony paths, through the bones of old forests, under stars that seemed suddenly cold. He didn't understand it. He had been kind. He had been honest. He had asked for nothing but a chance. Why did the ache grow stronger each day? Why did he, a god, feel so small? He climbed a ridge and looked out across the valley, where the forests stretched like a sleeping animal, breathing in slow waves of green. Somewhere down there, Daphne moved. He could feel her presence like gravity. "I would never cage you," he whispered to the night. "But still I chase." And in the silence, the wind replied, "And still she run." In the depths of the woods, Daphne leaned against an ancient tree, chest rising with each breath. She could still feel him, Apollo, the weight of his presence, the strange sorrow in his eyes. She had expected hunger, possession. Instead, she found worship, and yet it terrified her more. She didn't want to be a goddess to a man. She didn't want to be the cause of someone else's suffering. She didn't want to become a myth. She just wanted to be. Daphne closed her eyes. "Father," she whispered to the wind, "if he comes closer, I will ask you again." She did not weep. She did not pray for love. She prayed for freedom. In Olympus, far above the trees, Eros sat on a branch of starlight, his legs swinging idly. He looked down at the earth below, at Apollo burning with longing, at Daphne burning with resistance. He sighed. They called him cruel, capricious, dangerous. But he was only the bow. It was the arrow that knew its mark. The chase did not begin with a footstep. It began with a look too long, too heavy, a look that tried to name what could not be named, and Daphne felt it deep in her bones. The tension that hangs in the air just before the sky breaks, the unspoken danger when silence stretches too far. The forest around her seemed tighter now, less like home, more like a cage she hadn't noticed forming. Even the streams whispered differently, as if the water was no longer flowing with her, but away from something approaching. And behind her, the presence. He didn't move yet, but he would. Apollo stood between light and longing. He watched Daphne slip through the trees with the grace of a shadow, and every part of him screamed to follow, not out of lust, not to conquer, but to be near, to feel her voice stir the air, to show her the truth of his devotion. He had tried kindness. He had whispered poetry. He had sung no songs to flatter, only pleas to be seen. But the arrow of gold in his heart was no longer desire. It was obsession. It pulsed with every beat of his immortal blood. And the longer she ran, the deeper it pierced. He took a step, then another. The chase began. Daphne heard him behind her, the rustle of leaves, the low crack of branches under careful feet. The forest opened for her, but resisted him. Still, he moved like a storm barely leashed. She ran, not like prey, but like something born to outrun even the gods. Her legs knew every slope, every thorn, every rock that pretended to be moss. Her breath came steady, trained from a life of movement. Her hands brushed bark, drawing strength from trees older than Olympus. But she knew the truth. She could run all day, and he would still be behind her. Gods do not tire, gods do not yield, and love, when cursed by arrows, becomes a thing that devours itself. "Daphne," he called. "Please, just stop, just speak to me once." His voice was soft, honest, painful. She did not stop. She veered right, leaping over a low ravine, landing with the poise of a deer. Behind her, Apollo followed, not flying, not flashing with power, running. His divine feet tore the earth in his desperation. Leaves curled at his passage. Even birds fled, disturbed by the unnaturalness of it. A god chasing a girl who had said no 1,000 times. Still, he ran. Still, she fled. "I do not want to hurt you," he cried. "I swear on my name on Olympus itself, on the lyre I've never put down for anyone but you." His words caught in the wind and wrapped around her shoulders like a net. She tore them away with silence. "Daphne, I love you." That was the final plea. But Daphne knew better than to trust gods who called their hunger love. She reached the edge of her father's river, just as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Her breath was sharp now. Her limbs ached, but not with weakness, with decision. She fell to her knees beside the churning water. "Father," she gasped, "I ask you now, set me free." The water stilled. From its depths rose a shape, coalescing from foam and reed and shimmering current. Peneus, god of the river. He saw her terror. He saw the glint of golden light drawing closer behind her. He heard Apollo's footsteps, now only seconds away. And without hesitation, he placed his hand upon his daughter's chest. "It will cost you," he said. "I give it freely," Daphne whispered, and then the change began. Apollo burst into the clearing, just as her fingers reached skyward. "Daphne," he shouted, reaching for her, but she was already vanishing. Her skin paled, hardened, darkened, becoming bark. Her arms lifted and branched, fingers curling into leaves. Her hair grew wild and green, her legs fused. Roots tore downward into the soil. Her breath slowed. Her eyes, those fierce, untamed eyes, looked at him one last time, not with fear, but with freedom. And then she was still, a laurel tree, elegant, tall, crowned with leaves that shimmered in the golden light. Apollo fell to his knees before her. "No," he breathed. "No, please." He touched her bark like one touches a grave, soft, reverent, hoping it was a dream. But the tree stood silent. The chase had ended, and the cost had been everything. The forest held its breath. Apollo did not move. He placed his forehead against her trunk, closing his eyes. "I loved you," he whispered. "I love you still." He pressed his lips gently to her bark. "I would have given you the sky." And in the rustle of laurel leaves, he thought he heard the answer. "I never wanted the sky." He sat there until the stars came. He did not fly. He did not return to Olympus. He only sat, breathing in the scent of her leaves, listening to the stillness she had chosen. The pain in his chest did not fade, and when he rose, he broke a single branch from her, just a few leaves, and held them to his heart. "If I cannot have your voice," he said, "I will carry your silence." He took those leaves and wove them into a crown. From that day on, he wore it always, not as a token of conquest, but as an oath. Time is a trickster. Much like the gods themselves, it can stretch a moment into eternity or collapse years into a sigh. And so it was with the chase between Apollo and Daphne. Not a single hour, nor even a day, but a pursuit that spilled out of time, echoing across seasons, skies, and the breath of the earth itself. In stories, they say Apollo chased Daphne once, through one grove, beneath one sun. But the truth lies deeper. The chase lived beyond the forest. It burned into memory, into myth, into the shape of the world. When Apollo began to follow Daphne, it was not with cruelty, but with confusion. He, a god who could illuminate the hearts of men, found himself blind, not blind in the eyes, but in understanding. He believed himself in love, but he did not yet understand the weight of love denied. He moved through lands not to claim, but to reach her. Yet every time he stepped closer, Daphne moved further away, not just in distance, but in essence. She disappeared deeper into the wild parts of the world, the places untouched by gods or men, where the trees still whispered ancient names and the rivers did not reflect Olympus in their water. Daphne was becoming legend before the end ever came. The seasons turned as she ran. Through spring, she darted between blooming dogwoods, her feet barely touching the grass. Bees hummed around her, vines curled protectively in her path. Apollo followed always at a distance, the air around him buzzing with his heat. In summer, she vanished into caves, cooled by underground springs. Her skin bore the sun's kiss, but never its ownership. He found her footprints, once left on warm stone, but they faded before he could trace them further. Autumn brought a brief stillness. She paused in a valley where the trees shed gold, and for a heartbeat, she felt something like peace. But Apollo's shadow reached even here, stretched long in the dusk. She heard his lyre again, soft, distant, filled with longing. And then came winter. Even then, she did not stop. She wrapped herself in pine and frost. The cold did not bite her. It became her armor. And Apollo, burning with the same fire, he pulled across the sky, pressed on, melting snow wherever he stepped, his desire undimmed. This was not a chase of footsteps alone. It was a chase through selves. Apollo changed. Slowly, inevitably, He began as a flame, a god, certain of his right to be answered. But as Daphne ran, and kept running, his certainty fractured. He questioned himself. Why did he follow? What did he truly seek? Love, possession, redemption. There were nights when he stopped beneath stars and whispered to the void, I only want to be near her, to speak, to be seen. But love built on a one-sided dream cannot bloom. It burns. And Daphne understood this long before he ever would. She ran not out of hatred, not even fear. She ran because she recognized the pattern. She had seen it in the stories told among nymphs, tales spoken with hushed breath and trembling hands, of Zeus, who became lightning, of Poseidon, who rose from the sea with waves as chains, of Pan, who made music into a trap, of women turned to trees, to rivers, to monsters. She had seen what happened when gods named their wanting as love, and she would not join their collection. She would not become a name added to a myth crafted by someone else's mouth. She would not lose herself to another's ache. She belonged to no one. Still, Apollo pursued, and as he did, he began to notice the signs the world left behind. Trees turned their trunks as she passed. Streams shifted direction to carry her scent away. Even the animals grew more alert in her wake, as though guided by something ancient, wild, and uncontainable. She was no longer just Daphne. She was the idea of escape itself. She had become what the world remembered, when it remembered freedom. And Apollo, despite himself, began to feel the shame of his own pursuit. He stopped calling her name. He stopped offering gifts. He just followed silent, barefoot, eyes wide, not like a god seeking a prize, but like a man trying to find a way out of himself. In a grove, hidden deep in the mountains of Arcadia, Daphne finally rested. She stood alone among the olive trees, her hands pressed to their trunks, her forehead against their bark. Her breath trembled, and from the roots came a voice, gentle and old. Daughter of the river, the trees whispered, Why do you run still? Because I must, she replied. Even the wind rests. I am not the wind. I am the space before it. And the trees were silent. They understood. She did not fear Apollo's power. She feared his persistence, the way love can look like worship, but feel like a prison, the way a golden cage still traps the bird. Apollo arrived in the valley days later. He did not call out. He saw her footprints, again fresh, light, and he sat beside them, placed his hand over them, and closed his eyes. He stayed there until the moon rose, trying to feel her presence through the earth, trying to ask, without speaking, how do I stop chasing what I never meant to hurt? But the stars had no answer, only silence. The chase had become a story by now. Mortals whispered of it in villages. Poets began to write fragments of song. They said the god of the sun had fallen for a nymph who ran faster than light. They said her hair turned to leaves when she passed through moonlight. They said she had made a vow never to be held, and that vow echoed louder than Apollo's prayers. And in the hearts of girls who listened to those stories, a strange fire was born, the fire of resistance. But myths do not allow endings to be written by mortals, only by gods. And the chase, though, stretched through months, and memory would end. Not in surrender, not in conquest, but in transformation. And that moment was close. Daphne felt it in her breath, in her bones. The way the world grew quieter around her, as though bracing for something irreversible. She ran again, but slower. Not because she was tired, because she was ready. For freedom, even in its cruelest form, is better than a gilded cage. She could feel him behind her, not in sight, not in sound, but in presence. Like the sun that warms your skin even when clouds veil the sky. The chase was nearly over, not because she could not run, but because there was nowhere left to run. Through mountain, meadow, grove, and glade, Daphne had outrun gods and stories, myths and prayers. She had slipped past mortals who gaped at the radiant figure that followed her through the hills. She had left behind her sisters, her forest, even her name, dissolving piece by piece into the essence of flight. But now, her steps carried her home to the banks of the river Peneus, her father's waters, her beginning, and perhaps her end. The river shimmered with early twilight, a soft silver ribbon curling between reeds and willow. The current spoke in ancient tongues, humming through rocks older than Olympus, whispering of storms, sorrows, and daughters. Daphne staggered to the edge, her lungs burning, her pulse thunder beneath her ribs. She dropped to her knees in the soft mud and cried, "Father." The waters stilled, the ripples softened, and from the river rose a shape not sudden, not violent, gentle, like mist blooming into form, a face carved from water and wind, hair woven of reeds and current, eyes deep with centuries. Peneus, the river god, her father. He looked down at his daughter, his wild, willful, unbending child, and sorrow stirred in the water's depths. "You have come to me," he said, voice rippling like calm rapids, "and behind you comes fire." Daphne clutched his watery form, her voice cracking. "He does not stop. I have said no with my eyes, my steps, my silence, and still he follows. I know. I would rather lose this body than lose myself." Peneus said nothing, but the current grew colder. "He is not cruel," she continued, "but his love is a net, and I was not born to be caught." "You were born of water," Peneus said, stroking her cheek, "and even rivers run until they are claimed by the sea." "Then make me a river too," she whispered, "or anything that he cannot touch." Peneus was silent for a long time. "You will not be what you were," he warned. "I would rather be bark than breath, a root than a ribcage." His eyes, ancient and sorrowful, studied her one last time. Then he placed both hands on her shoulders. "So be it." Behind them, Apollo broke through the trees. He saw her then kneeling at the river's edge, her hair tangled, her back trembling. Relief and fear struck him at once. "Daphne," he cried, running to her. "Please don't be afraid. Just let me speak." She looked back, one final glance, and in her eyes, he saw not hatred, not even fear, but choice. The transformation began before he could reach her. Her feet sank into the earth, ankles twisting, merging with soil. Her legs stiffened, stretched, darkened, split. Bark spread like fire up her body, wrapping her like armor, sealing her from the world. Her spine arched. Her arms reached to the heavens and burst into branches. Leaves unfurled from her fingers. Her breath slowed, her heartbeat silenced, and her mouth open, in one last wordless cry, froze into stillness. A laurel tree, tall and beautiful, rooted where once stood a girl who would not be claimed. Apollo stopped. He stared at the tree, his chest rising, collapsing, his hands hovering in the air as though still reaching for her skin. He touched the bark. It was warm. His lips parted, but no words came, only a sound, something between a gasp and a prayer. "No," he whispered. "No, please." He dropped to his knees. "I didn't mean for this." The tree did not answer, only its leaves fluttered in the wind. He pressed his forehead to her trunk. "I would have worshipped you. I would have made the stars sing your name. I would have built temples with your image carved into every stone." Still, she said nothing. And so, in silence, he wept, not as a god, as a boy in love with a ghost. And then, with slow reverence, he rose. He stepped back from the tree, his face pale, his eyes red with grief and awe. He reached toward the laurel's branches and gently plucked a few leaves, tender, green, trembling with the life she still held. He held them to his chest. "I will make you eternal," he said. "If I cannot hold your hand, I will carry your spirit. You will crown the wise. You will adorn the heroes. Poets will write wearing your leaves. Victory will wear your name. He looked up at the tree once more. You will never belong to me, he said. But the world will know you. The air changed, not with thunder, not with fire, but with the soft reverence of something sacred unfolding. In the breath between Apollo's outstretched hand and Daphne's final step, the world held its breath. The sun paused in its descent. The birds fell silent. Even the wind, ever moving, stilled in place, as though the fabric of nature knew what was about to happen and bowed to it. This was no ordinary transformation. This was metamorphosis born of will, not curse. It was not punishment. It was rescue. And it began, not with light or song, but with roots. Daphne's feet froze first. Where skin once met moss, bark now bloomed. Her toes split into tendrils that burrowed into the soil, reaching downward, seeking purchase. Her calves hardened. Her knees stiffened, not with cold, but with an ancient stillness, as if her legs remembered the feeling of earth far better than of running. She stood, arms outstretched to the sky, not in surrender, but in elevation, as if ascending not upward, but inward. Her body was vanishing, yet she was more herself than ever. Apollo stumbled forward as the change overtook her. Please, he breathed. Don't go. Let me speak. Let me hold you. But the time for touch had passed. Her waist became trunk, her ribs forming the heartwood of something everlasting. Her arms lengthened, reached outward and upward, unfurling with leaves the color of new life. Her hair twisted and merged into curling branches, her breath slowing into wind, her voice softening into silence. Yet her eyes, they were last to change. They met Apollo's gaze one final time, and they said, I chose this. Then they closed, and were gone. Where once stood a girl of wild grace and breathless defiance, there now stood a laurel tree, slim, tall, trembling slightly in the golden air. But Apollo knew it was her, not a statue, not a memory. Her. He stepped forward and pressed both palms to the bark. It was still warm. He closed his eyes and felt her pulse, not in rhythm, but in presence, a stillness so full it silenced even his grief, and something inside him broke. The part that had chased, the part that had burned, the part that believed that love, once pure, could never harm. He had not meant to hurt her. He had only meant to be close. But closeness without consent is not love. It is hunger, and hunger consumes everything. He sank to his knees at the base of her roots. The leaves above rustled gently. Though no wind stirred, he bowed his head. I did this, he said. I swore I would protect you. Instead, I made you choose between your body and your freedom. The laurel swayed. Was it her? Was it grief? Was it forgiveness? He did not know. I cannot undo what's done, he whispered. But I can remember. He stood slowly, tears on his cheeks, not from pain, but from the unbearable truth. He reached toward her branches, not to break, not to steal, but to honor, with a touch soft as prayer. He gathered a handful of her leaves. He pressed them to his lips, and then to his heart. He held them aloft and spoke, not to her alone, but to the world. From this day forward, let the laurel be sacred. Let its leaves crown the wise, the poets, the brave. Let no victory be complete without her grace. Let her name never be forgotten, though her voice is now the wind. He wove the leaves into a crown, no gold, no jewels, only green, living, breathing, Daphne, and he placed it upon his head. From that moment, the laurel became a symbol not of conquest, but of devotion without possession, worn by philosophers, worn by champions, worn by those who sought not glory for themselves, but honor for something greater. It was said that when Apollo returned to Olympus, he spoke no words of his journey, only arrived with his golden hair crowned in leaves, and eyes darker than before. He played his lyre differently after that, slower, more sorrowful, and in every note there was a memory of running feet, wind in trees, and the silent final gaze of the one who had become untouchable. And the tree, it remained, deep in the woods, where mortals rarely tread, and gods only whisper. The laurel stands still. Birds nest in her branches. Rain sings down her bark. And sometimes, only sometimes, when the sun filters just right, and the wind carries a melody unplayed, you might hear a voice. I am not yours. I never was. But I will always be heard. The forest had stilled. The chase had ended. Daphne was no longer running. She stood now rooted, transformed not in defeat, but in declaration. No chains bound her. No hands clutched her. Her voice had been swallowed by silence. But that silence rang louder than any cry. She had not surrendered. She had chosen, and from her branches, the wind whispered a song the world would never forget. Apollo stood before her, motionless, his golden robes heavy with dust, his shoulders bent not from weariness, but from reverence. For the first time in his long, divine life, he had lost something not to war, not to treachery, but to truth. He had wanted her, but her answer had been clear, not in words, but in bark, in stillness, in the rustling of leaves where laughter used to live. He stepped forward, barefoot. The grass around the laurel parted for him, but not out of fear, out of sorrow. Apollo reached toward her trunk. His fingers trembled, barely brushing the bark that had once been skin. The grooves felt like veins, and if he pressed hard enough, he imagined he could feel her pulse, not fast, not fearful, steady. She was alive, but unreachable, and that, more than anything, made him weep. I do not deserve to be near you, he whispered, but if I must carry the ache of your absence, let me carry something of your presence too. He knelt, as one would at a shrine, and with slow, careful hands, he gathered several of her leaves, those soft, green things that curled like lashes toward the sky. They smelled of wind and memory, of what could never be. He stood, cradling them in his palms as though they were light itself. I vow, he said, voice shaking, that you will never be forgotten. His words, at first, were simple, quiet, spoken only to the laurel and the sky above, but they rose, carried on wind, etched into history not as a whisper, but as a divine oath. Let this tree be sacred. Let her name be carved into time, not as a prize, but as a prayer. Let every poet wear her leaves and speak only truth. Let every victor bear her crown, not to boast, but to remember humility. Let this tree be the emblem not of desire fulfilled, but of boundaries honored. Let the laurel be my mourning, my devotion, my penance. From that moment on, Apollo never removed the crown. He wore it not as a trophy, but as a reminder, and every time he sang, her name was hidden in the chords. Every time he played his lyre, her story trembled in the strings. The muses wept the first time they heard it. The other gods, those who once teased Eros for his tiny bow, grew silent when they saw the sorrow stitched into Apollo's light. Even Eros, seated in the shadow of a cloud, lowered his head. He had won. But he had not meant for it to end this way. Back in the mortal world, the laurel grew, and with it, legends. Travelers who stumbled across the grove felt something stir inside them, an unease, a reverence, a quiet knowing that this was not an ordinary tree. Some said it whispered their names. Others said it asked nothing at all, only stood watchfully, guarding its silence. They began to pluck its leaves, braid them into rings, place them upon the heads of the wise and brave. Soon, kings were crowned not with gold, but with laurel. Poets were honored not with riches, but with wreaths. Heroes returned from battle not to feasts, but to the soft, cool touch of green pressed against their temples. They called it Daphne on the Tree of Daphne, and so her legacy lived, not through children, not through lineage, but through the idea of her. Daphne became the symbol not of the woman taken, but of the woman who refused. She was etched into stone, painted onto amphorae, whispered through centuries, and every time a crown of laurel was lifted to a brow, it carried with it not just praise, but the memory of a girl who chose stillness over surrender. Apollo kept returning, season after season. He would walk alone into the forest, past wild flowers and sun-warmed roots, until he reached her. He never spoke. He would kneel, rest his hand upon her trunk, and listen, not for answers, but for forgiveness. It never came, but neither did blame, only silence, and the dance of leaves. One day, as he sat beneath her branches, he heard a faint rustle. A breeze stirred, and the leaves moved, not just with the wind, but with rhythm. A melody, soft, distant, familiar, his own, but slower, reversed, as if the tree were playing his song back to him not as a god would, but as a girl might, thoughtfully, hesitantly, tenderly, his eyes filled with tears. He said nothing, he only closed them, and for the first time since her transformation, he smiled. There are loves that burn like wildfire, consuming everything in their path. There are loves that bloom quietly, like ivy wrapping around stone, and then there are loves that never touch, that remain at a distance, aching, reverent, eternal. Apollo's love became the last kind. He never touched her again, not her bark, not her roots, not even the leaves he had once crowned upon his head. From the moment Daphne became the laurel, she was no longer a desire to be held. She was a memory to be protected. He came often, walking the forest in silence, sometimes barefoot, sometimes weeping, sometimes just sitting with his back to her trunk, playing a song that never finished. The world knew him as a god of light, but in those woods, he was simply a man who had loved someone who did not love him back and learned to live with it. That, too, was a kind of divinity. Years passed, then decades, then centuries, and yet Daphne remained, unaged, unmoving, but not forgotten. Her branches grew, arching over the glade like a canopy of grace. Her leaves never wither, evergreen through summer and snow, just as Apollo had sworn, and with each passing season, more and more came to know her story. They did not speak of her as victim. They spoke of her as a boundary carved into myth. They told children, this is the tree that said no to the sun. And the sun, in turn, did not scorch it. He circled it, warmed it, guarded it, and gave it a place among stars. Apollo changed too. He no longer chased anything, not women, not worship, not glory. He played for silence now, for birds, for wind, for memory, and with every note, he built a bridge, not to claim the past, but to understand it. He wore no more golden robes, only simple white, and the laurel crown, always, upon his head, not because he had won her, but because he never would. It was said that when great poets died, Apollo greeted their souls personally, placing a single laurel leaf on their tongues, before guiding them into Elysium. It was said that before every great battle, he whispered into generals' dreams, let no crown matter more than mercy, and it was said that when lovers prayed to him for passion, he answered only if their hearts beat in unison, not in pursuit, because he had learned the difference, because she had taught him. In time, Daphne became more than a tree. She became a symbol of refusal without rage, of identity beyond beauty, of stillness more powerful than pursuit, and all the world began to feel her. She was the echo in every woman who dared say no to power. She was the breath inside every man who learned to love without possession. She was the hush before a song, the root beneath a temple, the crown placed not on the victor's head, but on the worthy one's brow. One day, long after Olympus had grown quiet and the old gods had faded into mist and memory, Apollo returned to the grove for the final time. The sky was gray, the wind was soft. He was older now, not in body, but in soul. He stood before the laurel tree, still as ever, still crowned in green. I am tired, he said. The leaves rustled, as they always had. I have kept my promise, he continued. No one ever forgot you. A pause. He reached up, removed his laurel crown, and laid it gently at her roots. For a long time, I thought I loved you, he said, and I did. But now, I understand what I loved wasn't just you. It was the freedom you never gave up, the silence you refused to surrender, the truth you became. A breeze passed between them, cool and clean. I wanted you to love me, he whispered. But now, I only want peace. And for the first time, he turned his back to her, not in rejection, but in release, and he walked away. The forest did not cry. It bloomed. The laurel stood tall, and above, in the heavens, the stars began to shift. A new constellation rose, branches outstretched, leaves open like hands, reaching not to grasp, but to offer. They called it Daphne, and it never moved. But it was always there. Thus ends the story of Apollo and Daphne, a tale not of love fulfilled, but of love transformed. A reminder that some of the greatest stories ever told are not about what we take, but about what we let go, and that sometimes the most powerful kind of love is the one that learns to love without ever touching.